the conference.
Eric Davis.
Has joined the conference.
Drew Elliott.
Has joined the conference.
Henry Johnson.
Has joined the conference.
Alan Duncan.
Has joined the conference.
Amy.
Has joined the conference.
Mike Ward.
Has joined the conference.
Hello, this is Eric. Is Deanna, are you on?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay. And sounds like we've got 3 board members. Was Todd going to be able to join us?
He said
Todd's here. Oh, terrific. Good. Okay, great. Well, then, Deanna, just let me know when we're ready to start.
we are ready to go, sir.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this October 16, 2018 meeting of the Executive Committee of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chairman of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. I now ask Dr. Townsend Smith to call the roll to determine that we have a quorum of the board participating, and I note to all listening that the Executive Committee quorum is 4 members. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Chair Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Ms. White.
Yes.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair, and it will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and voting on the matter. So, board members, you've seen the agenda for today's executive committee call and had an opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda, and if not, I request a motion for approval. Is there a motion?
This is Amy White. I'll move for approval of today's agenda.
Thank you. Motion by Ms. White, second by Mr. Duncan. I'll now ask Dr. Townsend Smith to call the roll to capture the vote to approve this agenda.
Chair Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. We have an approved agenda, so we'll now move direct to our one item on our agenda, which is a report from the FAST NC Steering Committee. I'm delighted to call on the chair of the FAST NC Steering Committee, Mr. Mike
Jill
Ward.
Hamnett.
Has joined the conference.
Mr. Ward?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, board members, for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. What we'd like to place before you this morning is the application process through which individuals and entities will request assistance through FAST NC. You have a copy of the proposed application, and I won't read it for you line item by line item, but there's some things that I do want to point out. The first is the purpose on the page, on the first page, and you'll note that the focus of the support is in the 28 counties that have been declared disaster areas, and that the focus of support is it's described a bit broadly, but we want to be nimble enough to respond to a number of needs: school supplies, school material supplies, and resources that aid students in being prepared for instruction, and that aid teachers in the restoration of a high-quality learning environment. Again, that's a bit broad, but we didn't want to box ourselves into the kinds and wind up being unable to respond to some requests that we think might legitimately aid in those purposes of helping kids and teachers get back to a high-quality learning environment. You'll see also eligibility that North Carolina public schools and public charter school students and employees would be eligible, but note also that the funds would actually flow through an LEA, and that a public school and that principals as relevant and superintendents always would wind up signing the application. You can see the various kinds of information that we've asked for that the applicant would provide. In item 9, you'll see there's a place to provide a total amount of funding that's requested, the purpose to which the funds will be used, and the sites at which they will be used are outlined at the bottom of the first page. The top of the second page asks the applicant to outline the benefit that they believe will accrue. And we also remind them that our intent here is not to duplicate that which insurance, county, state, or federal governments will provide support for. Note that item 14 calls for a simple budget to outline the amounts for the various expenditures, and then 15 asks how the check should be, how the funds should be distributed. Note that in both instances, we've asked for a copy of the school district's IRS Form W-9. We're informed that we need that information as the request comes from the LEA. We also make note under that item that the steering committee reserves the right to require that receipts be provided for the purchases that are made for the funds. And I'm sorry, there's something I skipped on item 9. If you'll scroll back up to item 9, we also, as a steering committee, reserve the right to adjust the dollar amount. So that could be based on resources or resources available or other considerations that might prompt the steering committee to adjust the amount. But anyway, we put those two provisos in. So item 16 asks for additional information about the payee, and then items 17 and 18 are signature spaces for the principal, if applicable, and for the superintendent. I'll just close by saying this before we turn it over to whatever questions and comments there may be. We promised you when we met with the full board that we would try and come up with a process that strikes a balance between adequate accountability and sufficient simplicity and nimbleness that it makes it possible for folks who are in a very difficult circumstance to go through the application without having to face a really daunting paperwork process. We hope we've struck that balance, but we look forward to the board's comments and recommendations about the process that we're proposing here. Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Questions from my colleagues? Well, Mr. Ward, I've got one. Could you describe, once applications in this form are received and the steering committee has a chance to review them and make a recommendation, what's the next step the steering committee would do in order to get to the point of being able to respond to the request?
Well, once we receive a request, it may be that we need some additional information in order to adequately review and consider the request. So the first step would be to make sure that we've clarified all the information that we need in order to make a recommendation. Then we would bring a recommendation from the steering committee would deliberate, make its recommendation about a response of yes or no, make its determination about whether or not the amount needs to be amended, whether or not we want to, in our response, require receipts of the applicant, or what kind of documentation trail we want from the applicant. We bring all that back to the state board steering committee, or executive committee rather, with a recommendation for the board's final approval, since they have jurisdiction over the North Carolina Education Fund.
Okay, thank you.
Once it's approved, once it's approved by the executive committee, DPI's fiscal staff would issue a check.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Ward?
I do have a question. This is Amy White. What happens to, or what is the process for unexpended funds once they've been dispersed?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, what is the process through which we would secure back to the North Carolina Education Fund funds that the applicant winds up not needing?
Yes, sir. That's much better stated, but that is exactly my question.
No, I just wanted to clarify and make sure I understood you. Yes, that's a great ask, and frankly, we probably need to address that and add that as an item to this form. The expectation that unexpended funds should be returned to the North Carolina Education Fund.
Well, if I may, one possible solution to that is to amend the process a bit and have the LEA actually incur the expenditure and then submit receipts for reimbursement. That way your funds would stay intact. That may add a cumbersomeness to the process, but that is one way to maintain the integrity of the fund.
Mr. Ward, if I could respond to that, I do agree that has the benefit of greater security of the education fund, but one of the dilemmas that our districts, particularly these districts, are facing is many of them have burned through all of their petty cash. They've gone through their available funding from their county and are frankly without funds. So that's not characteristic of every district or every charter school, but for some of our most heavily impacted districts, that's certainly what they're facing. So I think we might all have to keep that in mind in developing a solution that achieves both goals.
I had a question, Chairman Davis. This is an appropriate time to ask.
Sure.
Wondering what are the amounts we're talking about that are part of FAST NC, and what specific group of people are kind of monitoring, giving oversight, and making decisions on where funds go. Sorry, I didn't know more about that. I know we discussed some in the last meeting, but I don't recall a lot of that.
Okay. Mr. Ward, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. The steering committee of FAST-NC is composed of 6 individuals. Myself, former state superintendent, June Atkinson, former state superintendent, Mark Johnson, current state superintendent, Phil Kirk, former state board chair, Eric Davis, current state board chair, and Henry Johnson, who was former associate state superintendent in North Carolina and state superintendent in Mississippi, and then associate U.S. Secretary of Education during the George W. Bush administration, and that was during the time of Katrina. So those are the 6 individuals that are form the steering committee that would receive the applications and make the recommendations to the board executive committee about response to those applications.
So that group right there is evaluating the applications. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I have another question. I'm sorry. This is Amy White. Are you going to vet all of the applications during the same time period, or is it going to be a rolling application process? For instance, let's just say Bertie County submits a request and they're first on the docket. They request $20,000, and you go, "This is a great application. We'd like to give them the $20,000." And 5 more counties apply, and the 6th county applies, and you go, "Oops, I'm out of money." Is there a process in place, or have you thought about how you would make sure that all counties have equal opportunity to apply based on the funds received?
Well, we won't make a recommendation about the expenditure of funds ahead of the board's approval of the process, and we do want to accept applications on a flow basis. In other words, as we receive them, we want to be dealing with them. The steering committee has set up a weekly meeting so that we can be considering these applications as they come in and be responsive on a timely basis. We recognize that means that at some point we just don't know what to expect in terms of the amount of requests that we might get or the magnitude of those requests. And so I think, and I haven't sounded this out with the steering committee, but I think our basic rule of thumb would be that we'd want to be as responsive as we could given the amount of funding that we have at the time, and not drain the bucket completely at any one point in time, knowing that other requests might be coming. That's a little imprecise, but I don't know how to put a finer point on it than that. If we run out,
I know that there are many schools that are not even back on campus yet, and so for teachers in the classroom and principals as leaders, they may not know. There are some schools that already know what they need. There are some schools who do not know what they
Has
need.
joined the conference.
It seems to me that if there were an open and closed date to alert school systems that there will be funds available and an application needs to be made by a date, that would give opportunities for school systems to go in and assess, and then we'll equally distribute funds available. How much money currently do we have in that fund?
it's right at $50,000. $14,000 of that predated Florence.
Yes, sir.
And so fundraising to date is somewhere in the neighborhood of $35,000.
That's great news.
Yeah, in addition, there is this $340,000 that is still in the account, but I would say it's encumbered, and we're seeking the General Assembly relief so that we can consider using those funds that were already in the education fund pre-Florence for this effort.
This is Jill. I just received, and I'm sure everyone else did, an email from Cecilia Holden reporting on yesterday's activities in the General Assembly, and she states that we are not slated to receive the $340,000 restored in the education fund.
Yeah, that was a statement of what action the General Assembly took yesterday.
Yesterday,
But we're still working towards
Still working, okay.
trying to get that approved. Other questions on the FAST-NC application and process? Okay. Hearing none. Yes. Go ahead.
Chair, this is Mike. I just wanted to get a sense of where the board is relative to the two issues of I heard the discussion around unexpended funds, and also the issue of once we announce that the application is available, the question of a specific start date and end date for the receipt of applications. I'm wondering especially about the latter. Not sure where we ended up on that. And
Can you?
I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear about the guidance that we're getting about those two issues.
Well, this is Amy. I would prefer that we have a clear start and end date to allow all LEAs impacted by the storm to have equal opportunities to apply for the limited amount of funds available. That way you can vet all of the applications and know, and maybe have a rubric for discerning which applications have the highest priority, and it would give you better clarity in how to allocate those funds.
This is Alan. I know the needs are urgent and rapid, but I
Has joined the conference.
tend to agree with Amy's comment. Just so there's an equality, some of the most impacted districts, as Amy said, aren't fully positioned to assess, even today, some of those needs that they might obviously make application for. And it appears we're not going to have unlimited resources to assist. So I do think we want to have some sense of proportionality as best we can with the resources that we will have access to. But I also realize that probably means the deadline cannot be too far out because the needs are great and they're urgent for now. So maybe if we could strike the right balance between those two things, that would be awfully helpful.
Mr. Chair. Yes, this is Mike again. Might it be possible for us to go in phases? I wouldn't want us to be in a situation where that first end date, A, is too far out, or B, is the only application period that would accept. So we might think in terms of multiple application periods. Would that be a possibility, so that we have a first round and then a second round with specific start and end dates? How does that sound to the board?
Any feedback on that idea?
This is Alan. That sounds like a good compromise to me to try to accommodate the needs of the various districts and the various different status points they find themselves in right now. So I'm trying to, no perfect solution here, regrettably, but that sounds like a way to get at the issue.
I can work with
readily construct that. And we can readily construct that rubric. I'm sorry I meant to add that, and I do apologize for the interruption.
Ms. White, you were saying?
I said I can accept that compromise. I think that's a good way to handle the issues, and certainly understand the committee's desire to get those funds to where they're needed most as quickly as possible. So that's an amenable solution.
Okay. All right. Are there any other parts of the application or process we would want to discuss before considering approving application and process based on this discussion?
Mr. Chair, this is Mike again. I apologize. But I did want to hear where we are relative to the issue of unexpended funds and allocations to the LEAs or charters. What process the board is disposed to have us use. There was discussion of the LEA incurring the expenditure and then being reimbursed, or a direct grant by check to the LEA with the understanding that unencumbered or unexpended funds would come back to the North Carolina Education Fund. Which is the preference of the board?
thoughts on that item?
Eric, one thought is if we were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, some reversion back to fund makes sense. I mean, right now, looks like we're talking 50 to 100,000 or something like that. Would it be worth even having a process where funds come back, or just leave them with the school? I don't know. Just a thought. Just trying to be practical.
I agree with Todd's practical thought, and we can always come back and revise that if for some reason we start to deal with funds that are significantly larger than where we are right now. But it's, at the moment, it's hard to imagine that a district wouldn't use all of the funds, given the amounts that we're going to be in a position to assign for the moment. But we can always change that and look back depending upon how the fundraising may alter that dynamic.
Well, I think there ought to be some sort of checks and balances, but the amount of money, given that there are 28 counties and only a limited amount of funds, we're not talking about a huge amount of money. But as someone who manages grant money as a part of my daily job, dotting the I and crossing the T every time is a part of that process that I'm aware of. So that's my perspective on why I bring it to the table. But you're right. We are talking about school systems in need with a small amount of dollars. Just would like to find some way of having someone maintain the integrity of those funds, because they are not they are donor funds. They are not state funds, and we want to make sure that we honor what those donors have given, and that the funds are spent in the way that they've been distributed. So I hear what
what would be some of the reasons that someone gets a $30,000 grant and they spent? I guess what you're saying is that they spent 25, and there'd be 5 there that would need to go back to the state. But, I guess that could happen as a remote, but I think that could happen. I see your point, but
and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that happens all the time with state funds, because LEAs are big, and so I just want to maintain these are not state dollars; they're donor dollars, and so just wanting to have some sort of process where we know what was spent, and if there's another $2,000 that's sitting there that didn't get spent, we could send that to another county. So. Again, I understand that I have a unique perspective that I bring to the table because I deal with those funds every day.
Yeah, Ms. White, I think you make a great point. Here's one thought. Given the point earlier that Todd made about the amount of funds and sort of practicality, I wonder if we modify the application to add a clear statement that the receiver of the funds will be expected to provide receipts and other proof of use of the funds, and any funds not spent will be returned to the education fund. That way we build in right up front in the application process the accountability that we expect, and then if we have to go back and be more aggressive, if we end up with larger amounts of money, hopefully, then we would have already put in place that accountability mechanism.
That sounds like a good idea. That meets what Amy's talking about. I can understand that.
I agree.
I agree also.
Okay, Mr. Ward, can we accomplish that?
I think so. Let me outline a case in point of a kind of request we know is already forming out there. I mentioned it to the board in the presentation a couple of weeks back. So let's use this as a case in point and see how the process would work. The districts have teachers who were displaced from their residences by the flooding or by the storm, and so these are folks who are having to, in order to get themselves in a position to serve kids, have first got to get themselves set up in household again. And so we know that some districts want to provide household startup grants to their teachers. Is the documentation that the board's looking for documentation of the grant that went to each teacher in a case like that, or are they looking for each teacher to bring back receipts for things that they incurred? In other words, is the local board's provision of documentation that a $750 grant went to these teachers sufficient, or do these teachers bring back receipts for the things they deployed that $750 in setting back up a household? It's just a case in point, and maybe that would help illustrate what might be a fairly difficult process of documenting, or the board may have some thoughts about that.
I don't think there's any need to micromanage at that level.
I agree with Amy. Like, if you had a $750 check to help out a teacher, that would be what would be documented: the date, who it went to, for what reason, and then the amount, and that would be adequate documentation, I would think. Instead,
that's really helpful. Thank you.
And then instead, every little $7 was spent on a meal or something. I don't know. So.
Okay. Any other points to discuss? All right, then I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the FAST-NC application and process as presented and discussed in this call. Is there a motion?
I could make a motion, Chairman Davis, that we move that we approve the FAST-NC application and process as we discussed in the meeting today.
Motion by Mr. Chastain. For a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. White. Thank you. Dr. Townsend Smith, can you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes. And just for the record, I'm just going to call the roll for the executive committee members for this particular call. Chair Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
All right, motion carries. Thank you, board members, and thanks to everyone who participated on this executive committee call today. This is our only item on our agenda, and so our business is concluded. And I now ask for a motion, and also thank you to Mr. Ward and the other members of the steering committee for this work on FAST-NC and helping to take care of our students and teachers. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very grateful for this feedback. We're going to have a better process as a result of this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll now call for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second. Chastain.
Second. Second by Mr. Chastain. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. Thanks to all who participated in this call. This meeting's adjourned. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Done.
Has left the conference.
Alan Duncan.
Has left the conference. A participant has left the conference.
Mike Ward.
Has left the conference.